We've all been there, just stopped in our tracks by words that cut so deep they leave you reeling. So today, we're going to explore the anatomy of that exact moment, what's happening in our minds when we get hurt, and why is our first instinct to try and make sense of it all. Let's dive in.
Who do you think you are? Or who would ever take you seriously? These aren't just words, right? They're a direct hit on our sense of self-worth. They honestly land like a punch, and that immediate shock, it can be totally overwhelming.
And let's be really clear about this. That feeling is 100% real. It is not an overreaction. The sting from a verbal attack can be just as sharp and just as memorable as a physical one. It's a universal human experience, and figuring out our own reaction is really the first step to moving past it. Okay, so what happens in those first few seconds and minutes after those words hit? Well, our response is often this complex storm of emotion, but it usually boils down to two really powerful and actually very distinct feelings. So this brings us to the two core reactions that often happen at the same time. On one hand, you've got hurt. That's that internal feeling of being diminished, where that awful little thought might creep in. Maybe they're right. But then there's anger. And that's our defense system kicking in, reacting to the sheer injustice of it all. It's that feeling that, no, a line was crossed here. Now, once that first wave of hurt and anger starts to fade a little, our minds do something pretty fascinating. We start a search. It's a search for a reason, for some kind of framework, for any kind of logic that can explain what in the world just happened. And that search, it often leads to a question that sounds a lot like this. This moment right here is a crucial turning point. We instinctively shift from just feeling the pain to actively trying to analyze where it came from. It's our brain's natural way of trying to get back some sense of control. This desire to classify someone, it's not about us becoming armchair psychologists, not at all. It's actually a really powerful coping mechanism. See, by trying to create a mental model for their behavior, we make it more understandable and we make it feel less like a personal threat. It's a way of reframing the whole thing to realize, wait a minute, this wasn't about me, this was about them. And this brings us to what is maybe the most constructive part of this whole process. The simple act of asking why isn't a sign of weakness. It's the very beginning of empowerment. Let's take a look at how this whole mental journey unfolds. So here we can see the entire journey laid out pretty clearly. It starts with the experience itself, then moves to our raw emotional reaction. But the most important step is that third one, the question. The moment we start trying to understand why, we stop being a passive victim of the hurt and we start becoming an active participant in our own healing. And ultimately, that's what this is all about. When you start asking why, you begin to take back the power. You are no longer defined by someone else's cruel words. Instead, you get to define the experience for yourself, putting it in a context that lets you move forward, while, reaffirming your own value. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to mull over. After exploring the deep impact words can have on us, it really forces us to think about the power we all hold. So the question becomes, how can we consciously use our own words, not as weapons, but as tools for understanding, for connection, and maybe even for healing?